start things off with Tyrone Tracy versus the Bucs. I mean, since week 5, the dude's been an absolute baller. He's averaging 16 carries, 86 rushing yards, and a half touchdown per game for 15 fantasy points per game. He also ranks 9th in explosive run rate, 13th in missed tackles forced per attempt. But the one thing that's been a little frustrating with him is just his lack of involvement in the passing game. He is running 50% of the routes and seeing a 9% target share within this offense. But you would think as somebody with the background that he has, somebody that was a wide receiver for the first 3 years of his career in college and then switched over to running back, that he would be involved a lot more in the passing game, but it just hasn't really been the case. We'll see how this will play out with Daniel Jones, now being benched, and now the third string quarterback here, and Tommy DeVito being brought up as the starting quarterback here. I went back and looked last year to see if there was any real big changes from when Saquon Barkley was there, when DeVito was the starting quarterback, and there really wasn't anything massive. So we'll see on this how this is going to play out. But either way, I still think that despite the fumble that cost them the game before they went on bye, I still think Tyrone Tracy is going to be the workhorse here. And this is a fantastic matchup because the Bucs have allowed a 4.7 yards per carry, which is the 9th highest rate. They've also allowed their 12th explosive run rate allowed. Their last in missed tackles forced per attempt, and then their 1.80 yards before contact per attempt ranks 9th. So overall, the Bucs have allowed the 6th most PPR points of position. So this is just a tremendous matchup for Tyrone Tracy this week. I really love this spot for him. He has basically been the absolute workhorse. Devin Singletary is taking on like a little bit of a secondary role. So Tyrone Tracy, I think, is a great play this week.
It really pains me for, obviously we're talking redraft, but for dynasty purposes, I have 0 Tyrone Tracy, and it really pains me, man. It hurts because we both liked him, and he was a popular, rookie sleeper for a lot of people. So it's not like me and you were out there banging the drum for him and nobody else was. But as much as I liked him, I got him in no dynasty leagues, and like every week where I see him tear it up, it just hurts more and more. I'm going to go ahead and throw out my first one. I'm going to start with David Montgomery. Really throwing him out there because we see Jahmyr Gibbs ranked over Monty every single week, and in most cases, it isn't particularly close. A week like this where we have as many teams on buys, I did notice it was a little bit closer in consensus rankings. I get the love for Gibbs, obviously, but I feel like too much shade is thrown on Monty, like he's some kind of fucking leper or something, when all the dude does is put up fantasy points. I said last week we shouldn't be surprised if Monty comes out and goes for 102 scores. He came through with the touchdowns. This game sets up similarly against the Colts. Although the Colts have only allowed the 13th most fantasy points per game to running back, so it doesn't look like a smash matchup on paper. There are 2 numbers that I love for Monty this week. Indy has allowed the 4th most rushing yards to running backs, as well as allowing the 4th highest yards after contact per attempt. Monty is 5th in juke rate, 6th in evaded tackles per player profiler, also having the 4th lowest stuff rate on his runs. This is obviously a fantastic spot for Gibbs as well, but nobody is ever debating whether or not to start Gibbs. I was trying to think about this, and obviously we've gotten hundreds of questions at this point, but I honestly don't know if we've ever had a start-sit question with Gibbs in it this year, whereas we always have questions every single week about Monty. I feel like enough is enough. It needs to stop.
Crazy too, because they pretty much split touches right down the middle. I was looking at this last week, whenever I think I talked about the same Jahmyr Gibbs, and they are literally splitting touches. It is 50-50 almost across the board, almost exclusively. Only real edge that Jahmyr Gibbs has over him is he's more involved in the passing game than David Montgomery is. But that's about it. But David Montgomery has obviously been solid this year. He's been one of the better running backs. The best thing about the Lions too is they just do not take their foot off the gas. They're not a team that once they get up a little bit, they kind of coast from there. I mean, we saw it last week against the Jaguars. I mean, they ripped their soul out and stomped on it right in front of them. Up 38-6, I think it was. And they go for it on 4th and 3 and score a touchdown. I'm like, who does that? Dan Campbell does. So I mean, hey, for fantasy purposes, phenomenal. Absolutely love to see it.
Sign me up.
Yeah. Next up, I'm going to move over to my next guy, and that is going to be Brian Robinson Jr. against the Cowboys. Robinson returned to action last week after missing 2 weeks with an injury. He saw 57% of the rush attempts. He ran 25% of the routes, but only saw a 3% target share, and that's been a pretty constant theme for him over the last 3 or 4 weeks that he's played. He hasn't really been involved in the passing game. It's been Austin Eckler basically handling that role. Eckler's handling roughly around 50% of the snaps as well. So this is definitely a 50-50 split. But Brian Robinson is basically seeing all of the touches on the ground, where Eckler's coming in and getting some touches on the ground, but then getting a lot more of the pass catching work. But Brian Robinson has still been one of the better running backs this year. He's been more reliable. He's scored a lot of touchdowns, so they do trust him there. He's getting that role as well. So, but this is a smash matchup for really both of these running backs, I think, but more so for Brian Robinson because of I do feel like the Commanders should be able to have really control of this. On the season, Brian Robinson has seen 62% of the total opportunities. He's averaging 14.2 PPR points per game, but the Cowboys have allowed a 5.06 yards per carry, which is the fourth highest rate in the league. 10 rushing touchdowns, the second only behind the Jets. And they have been allowing big plays on the ground with a 7.9% explosive run rate, second highest rate in the league. Their 38% stuff rate is fourth worst, and their 2.32 yards before contact is the third highest rate in the league. So this is just a tremendous matchup this week for Brian Robinson. I think he is a very much a borderline RB1 option this week.
And I feel like a lot of the Eckler stuff last week too is just matchup based. I mean, I don't think that they're going to need to involve him as much in the passing game, which is obviously going to open up some more touches for B-Rob as well. My second play at running back this week is going to be James Conner going up against a Seahawks defense that is allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to running backs on the year. Seattle has been better in recent weeks, though. Back-to-back games, they have faced Kareem Williams and Christian McCaffrey, held McCaffrey to like 4.6 or 4.5 yards per touch. Kyron Williams was at 4.1. It's certainly possible something similar happens to Conner in this spot, but it's too hard not to love his role and involvement. He's 8th in weighted opportunities on the year. In his 5 games leading up to the Cardinals Week 11 bye week, he also quietly racked up 20 targets, which tied him for the 7th most over that time frame. The Arizona backfield as a unit has seen the 12th highest target rate across the league at 18.1%, which is something that really surprised me when I saw it. So basically, this is just a long-winded way of saying I like Conner despite the tougher matchup.
I think some of it the answer might be in that they traded for Ernest Jones. And because I was looking at that, since they basically acquired him, their run defense has gotten a lot better. So I do think that has something to do with it there, that big of a change, because before they were dreadful against the run. But like you said, I still think Conner is a good play. Next up for me is going to be Najee Harris. I am not typically a Najee Harris guy. I'm not somebody that usually goes out of my way to really think that he is a good play, but I actually think he is this week. So since week 6, it has been a little bit more of a split between him and Jaylen Warren, where he's only handling 52% of the snaps, 53% of the rush attempts. He's running 30% of the routes, but seeing a 7.5% target share. He is averaging 15 PPR points per game, but really where I really like him, and actually I like Jaylen Warren as well. I think Jaylen Warren's a really solid flex option. Is the weather in this game looks absolutely brutal. Like this is one of the first like real weather games we're going to get this year. And right now, what it's looking like is heavy rain during the game, 20-mile-an-hour winds with 35-mile-an-hour wind gusts. It's going to be closer to 35 degrees outside. Like this game feels very much like it is going to be grounded pound defense. I don't think we're going to see a lot of Jameis throwing the football. We know the Steelers have no problem with just running the ball if you allow them to. And so that's why I like Najee Harris so much this week. And Cleveland really has been really bad against the run. So on the season, they have allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to running backs. But this is something what I was just talking about. Once we zoom in, though, since week 6, the Browns have really fallen off. They have allowed a 4.5 yards per carry, which is the 12th highest rate. They have allowed a ton of big plays, which shows with their 6.5% explosive run rate. That's the 6th highest rate in the league. And they have also allowed the 6th highest yards before contact per attempt. I mean, we just saw last week with Taysom Hill rip off a 75-yard run. And listen, I love Taysom Hill, but Taysom Hill is not some speed demon that should be ripping off 75-yard runs against people. So it's been one of the biggest problems with Cleveland this year has been this explosive play that they continue to allow, and it's really killed them. And so I like I said, I'm not usually a huge Najee guy, but on a week where we have 6 teams on bye, I think he's pretty close to a top 15 running back play this week and especially in the game environment that we're going to be seeing with this game. So I think everything lines up for Najee. He's probably going to see 20, 25 touches in this game. And so if you have him, I think you feel pretty good about playing him.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned Jalen Warren in passing too, but I agree with you. I think because of how everything is setting up, he's a solid flex play. I was looking at the weather and the Steelers being, I think they're up and down against the run. I don't think they're like as dominant as people think they are. So I was trying to like maybe talk myself into some like Jerome Ford as like a full PPR like flex kind of guy, assuming that Nick Chubb has trouble, going up against the Steelers defensive line. But then I was like, this is Jameis Winston we're talking about. I can't imagine there's going to be too many times that they're going to dial up, screens to Jerome Ford or we see him dump off to him. So I looked at that for like a second, then I was like, no, I can't. I can't do that with Jameis at the helm.
Yeah, I don't expect there to be a lot of throwing the ball. I mean, so typically we know that weather is usually not that big of a deal. It's the wind, the factor that matters the most. And basically, I know it's been a study that was done a few years ago that basically once it gets to 20-mile-an-hour winds, quarterback production
Insane.
drops off a cliff. And so it's just the game environment does not set up nicely. Now it is still a few more days away, and so it's possible that maybe the weather changes a little bit, but right now it has not changed at all, and it looks like it's going to be pretty brutal. So like I really want no part, and it sucks because like, I want no part of the passing games. I wouldn't play Russell Wilson. I wouldn't play James Winston. I wouldn't play George Pickens. I wouldn't play Cedric Tillman. I wouldn't play Jerry Jeudy. Like it's
Yeah.
possible one of them get there off a situation, but for the most part, it's just not a good situation for either one of these teams. And both of these teams have the ability to run the ball, at some level. So especially the Steelers, we know they want to run the ball, and so I think that's what you're going to see. It's going to be kind of a gross, old style 90s style football game where the defense and running the ball. And so I actually don't even mind Nick Chubb either as an option, just because I don't think that's good. I don't think you're gonna be able to do a lot of passing the ball. And if you're not worried about a lot of the Steelers, ripping up some deep balls, stuff like that, because on the surface, whenever I first saw this game, I was like, man, this is a great matchup for the Steelers this week and for George Pickens
Yeah.
because the Browns, like I've said, have allowed so many explosive plays this year. It lines perfectly with what Russell Wilson loves to do, but I just can't do it this week.
Which is a shame. So like, I agree. We're not going to have the Russell Wilson moonshots that we've seen over the past couple of weeks. But moving on to my third play at running back for the week, I am going to go to Kareem Hunt. I know we kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of Pacheco potentially coming back. But if Pacheco does miss, Hunt is going to jump into the top 10 for me easily, going up against a Panthers defense that has been absolutely gashed on the ground all year. Even if Pacheco comes back, like I think because of the injury that he's coming back, plus the opponent that they're facing going up against the Panthers, I don't see them throwing Pacheco in here and Pacheco getting, more than like 10 touches. Like I just think there's no reason to do it. I think they need to ramp him up slowly. I think this could be a multi-week thing with how Pacheco is used. Obviously the Panthers offense has looked functional with Bryce Young under center, but I just don't see this being a situation where like the Panthers are pushing the Chiefs, especially the Chiefs coming off of their first loss. I just don't see a scenario where the Panthers are gonna really push them, and Pacheco is gonna need to be forced into like elevated touches or an elevated snap count. So the Chiefs' implied team total this week is also the third highest for week 12. So there should be plenty of opportunities for the signature Kareem Hunt 1 yard plunge.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I don't see any reason for them to get ultra aggressive with Isaiah Pacheco in a game like this. It's just not really needed. So I typically agree. But I do think both of them are definitely in play. Like I think Kareem Hunt probably for this week is probably the smarter play. He's probably more of the top 24 RB2, where Pacheco is probably more of an RB3 option for this week. But it really comes down to what other options you have. Like I don't think you have to play Isaiah Pacheco either. Like
Yeah.
if you have other options, which I'm assuming at this point you should because of he's been out for so long. But if that's the case, I think you could look there. But I don't think it's like a he's certainly not like a must play or anything like that. Even though the matchup is definitely there. So my last guy that I want to hit on, I want to talk about the Buccaneer situation right now. Bucky Irving gets a great matchup this week against the Giants, but Bucky and Rachaad White have essentially split touches this season. Bucky is more of the 1B in the offense. He's seeing about 45% of the snaps, 40% of the rush attempts, 37% of the routes, 10% target share. He's also averaging 14.9 fantasy points per game since week 6. Bucky has easily been the better runner between the two. Bucky ranks 4th in yards created per touch, 3rd in elusive rating, and 7th in evaded tackles so far this year. Also, as a receiver, he's been really good. I mean, 15th in yards per route run, 19th in yards per reception. And now you get a matchup against the Giants, who just have been exploited time and time again against the run. They're 5.39 yards per carry, is the second highest rate in the league. Their 10.2% explosive run rate is by far number 1 in the league. They're also 11th in missed tackles forced per attempt, and their 2.42 yards before contact per attempt is also 8th most. So, all those things being said, I think this sets up really well for Bucky Irving to see, maybe even a little more of an expanded workload, because I think if there, it's certainly a possibility if this team is able to build a pretty quick lead. And let's be honest, there is a lot of dysfunction going on right now, surrounding the New York Giants. Report came out, we were talking about it right before the show, but that there's a lot of players that are really upset about how this thing was handled with Daniel Jones. And so I don't know, this could be a big time letdown spot for the Giants. And so it could just be great news for Bucky Irving, see an expanded role, on the ground. But either way, he's been one of the better, more efficient running backs we've seen this year, and this is just a really good spot. So right now, I have Bucky Irving as RB20, and I have Rachaad White at RB24. I think both of these guys are in good spots this week. And better news too, the last time this team played, Sean Tucker didn't even see a single snap. So that was also a positive, because they was kind of trending towards a little bit being more of a 3-down workhorse or three-headed monster or backfield here, and that kind of went away. So that's positive. And also, Mike Evans sounds like he's going to be back this week too. So it could be wheels up. I mean, the Bucs may end up smoking the Giants.
Yeah, happy Mike Evans week to all of you who are going to be celebrating. I know I certainly will be. The last guy I'm going to talk about is going to be Javonte Williams. Kev, my Audric Estime hate was vindicated last week. We ended up getting a bunch of questions on start sits with Audric Estime. I don't think I said Estime a single time. And last week was really why. It's not necessarily the player, just because I don't trust that situation. Obviously we can get reverse rug pulled here with Javonte Williams. But, after we saw Javonte get out touched, 14-1 or 13-1 in week 10, Sean Payton comes out, says Audric Estime is going to be more involved. And then what ended up happening, Estime, I don't think, got a touch until like the third quarter or something. The majority of his touches came once this game was out of hand for the Broncos. It was all Javonte early on. Now we're going up against a Raiders defense that have allowed the eighth most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Denver goes into this matchup as 8.5-point road favorites, which is not something I thought I'd be saying at the beginning of the year. Williams hasn't been particularly explosive, but that's all right here because Denver's offensive line has the 11th highest adjusted yards before contact per attempt number, and the Raiders are allowing the 8th highest yards after contact per attempt across the league. So, Javonte Williams is going to have to get it done in terms of, running away from this defense. Holes could just open up, and then he's going to be able to break tackles and get away from that. So I do like Javonte Williams, but as always, there is the chance that we have the rug pull on Williams this week, and it ends up being a Jaleel McLaughlin week. But I think Williams probably has the safest floor for touches, although he might not be the running back who ends up leading them this week.
It was such a weird situation because Sean Payton the last 2 weeks prior to that game last week was Audric Estime's earned more touches. He's gonna get more opportunities. Audric Estime is gonna be the guy. So like that's where it all came from. And of course,
not so fast, my friend.
I got. So Javonte Williams comes out and just controls that game. Had a pretty solid game. I mean, all things considered. So we'll see how this continues. But yeah, I mean, it is a good spot. It's a great matchup. Another team that is in not just continues to lose. I know that there was a close game last week against the Dolphins, but I do think Javonte makes sense too in certain ways because he's also pretty involved in the passing game as well. So I don't mind that call at all. He was actually somebody that I was considering talking about, on this show, but then I ended up changing it up and going with Bucky Irving, so I decided to talk about. So, but that being said, I think this week is a little rough. I feel like this week is probably going to be more of a week where you're going to want to play wide receivers in the flex, where really before today, it had been very much like you want to play running backs in the flex because running backs have just been phenomenal. Like it's crazy that like a running back averaging 14, 15 fantasy points per game in PPR formats. That's like an RB20. That's typically almost like a back end RB1 in years past. Like we have just seen this crazy run this year with running backs where all these guys are producing. No injuries are really occurring all that much. We've had a couple here and there, but nothing crazy for the running back position. And it's just been absolute chaos for wide receivers. Like it
Yeah.
just have lost so many wide receivers along the way this year. So it's been pretty wild. But this week, I don't think there's like a ton of just like flex options that we're going to be, pounding the table to want to play this week at running back. So to me, it's very much more of a wide receiver in the flex option type of week because there's just more options, and I think it's a little bit safer.